The betrayal that changed everything. Have you ever had a moment in your life when you realized, with crushing clarity, unconditionally, never second best? And that moment came for me with a sing I never imagined that my own parents, to look me in the eye and say, "Welcome, I not good enough. Too much of a burden." But here's the thing about underestimating someone who has been taken for granted for far too long. Sooner or later, they weigh. And when they do, they don't just walk away. They make sure you regret every single choice that led them there. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about self-worth, about breaking free from toxic family dynamics, and about proving, once and for all, that you are not disposable. And trust me, you won't want to miss a second. So watch all the way to the end, because Tiet might be yours too. Before we dive in, leave a comment below if you've ever experienced family betrayal like justice, karma, and ultimate revenge. Don't subscribe to Destiny Rewritten, this is just the beginning. Act 1. The Heartbreaking Call, The Power of Exclusion, a deep dive into betrayal, family favoritism, and taking back control. Family betrayal is one of the most painful experiences a person can endure. It's one thing to face rejection from strangers, but when it comes from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, your own parents, it cuts deeper than words can describe. This story about a mother being forced to choose between her dignity and her toxic family dynamics resonates with so many people who have had to walk away from unhealthy relationships, even when it means severing ties with those closest to them. To truly understand the psychological and emotional weight of this story, let's break down the key aspects. 1. The illusion of family loyalty. 2. Favoritism and its lasting impact. 3. The courage to set boundaries. 4. The consequences of cutting toxic people off. 5. Historical and modern examples of walking away from betrayal. 1. The illusion of family loyalty. The story begins with a seemingly innocent phone call, one that was supposed to bring good news about a holiday gathering. Instead, it delivered an emotional gut punch. A mother being told that her children weren't welcome at Thanksgiving. The mother, like many people, had believed in the idea that family always comes first. This belief is ingrained in us from a young age. Society teaches us that no matter what happens, family bonds should remain unbreakable. However, this concept is deeply flawed when those family ties are used as a weapon for control, exclusion, or favoritism. Take Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, for example. She believed that marrying into the British royal family meant gaining a new support system. However, over time, she realized that family loyalty doesn't always go both ways. When she and Prince Harry decided to step away from royal duties due to mistreatment and bias, the backlash was immediate. The institution that was supposed to protect them turned its back on them instead. The same can be said for the protagonist in our story. She had always been a reliable daughter, supporting her family without hesitation, yet when it came time for a simple Thanksgiving dinner, her children, her most precious treasures, were cast aside without a second thought. This moment serves as a brutal wake-up call. Family loyalty is meaningless when it's one-sided. 2. Favoritism and its lasting impact. Favoritism is one of the most damaging forms of family dysfunction. It leaves lasting emotional scars, creating lifelong resentment and deep-rooted insecurities. In our story, we see favoritism play out in the most painfully obvious way. The protagonist's parents not only exclude her children, but openly embrace her brother's kids, justifying it by saying they are better behaved. This is where the emotional toll becomes unbearable. Favoritism isn't just about preferring one child over another. It's about devaluing the lesser child and making them feel invisible. This phenomenon is not limited to small families. It happens even in high-stakes environments like business and politics. Take Elon Musk, for example. His openly admitted to favoring Elon's brother Kimball, which created a strained relationship with his father, is a testament to how favoritism can create irreparable wounds. For the mother in this story, this wasn't just about one Thanksgiving dinner, it was about lesser. 3. the courage to set boundaries. Walking away from a toxic family dynamic is one of the hardest decisions a person can make. Most people woo. However, boundaries are essential. Without them, we allow people to continuously hurt us without consequences. A great example of this in the real world is Oprah Winfrey. She came family members who continuously tried to exploit her success. After one of the toughest decisions of her life, cut off several toxic relatives and folk, the protagonist in this story follows the same path. She not only refuses to attend Thanksgiving without her children, but she also cuts off financial support that her parents had been quietly leeching from her for years. This was a turning point for self-respect. She was no longer a passive recipient of mistreatment, taking control of her own destiny. The consequences of cutting toxic people off. When you take power away from people who are used to controlling you, they don't just let it go without a fight. Her parents immediately retaliate by playing classic narcissistic behavior. When the gaslight, guilt trip, and shame you into compliance. This happens in all walks of life, not just family relationships. Consider Steve Jobs, the legendary founder of Apple suddenly treated him as expendable. Jobs, however, built something even bigger and better. He found Next and Pixar, which ultimately backled him back to Apple as a more powerful and indispensable leader than ever before. This is exactly what happens in our story. When the protagonist cuts off her parents financially, they resort to outrageous tactics, even bill her for the cost of raising her, an absurd, but she doesn't cave. And that's the ultimate lesson. When you stand your ground against toxic people, they will fight back, but only because they are losing control. 5. The ultimate lesson: you owe toxic people nothing. The biggest takeaway. Just because someone is family doesn't mean they deserve a place in your life. Favoritism and favoritism and exclusion are forms of emotional abuse. You do not owe toxic people access to your time, energy, or finances. This mother was forced to make a painful decision: freedom. The world is full of people who have had to walk away from relationships that no longer serve them. From celebrities like Meghan Markle to business titans like Steve Jobs, the people who truly love you will never force you to beg for their acceptance. The protagonist in this story chose herself, her children, and her happiness over the illusion of family loyalty. And in doing won the greatest battle of all, the bat. Final thoughts. This story is not just about revenge. It's about empowerment. So if you've ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel disposable, second class, or unworthy, remember this. You have the power to rewrite your own destiny, and that is the sweetest revenge of all. Act 2. The silent rejection, unspoken power and privilege. The price of favoritism and the strength to walk away. Favoritism in families is one of the oldest, yet most painful dynamics in human relationships. It often lurks beneath the surface for years, whispered in conversations, evident in the smallest gestures, and eventually becoming an undeniable truth. This is the story of a woman who spent her entire life being the reliable, selfless daughter, only to realize that she was nothing more than an afterthought in her parents' eyes. Her breaking point? Not for herself, but for her children. This story echoes a theme that has played out across history, even among the most powerful families. Think about how Prince Harry broke away from the British royal family. He was always the spare, overshadowed by Prince William, the golden child, the heir. His departure from the monarchy wasn't just about Meghan Markle. It was a lifetime of feeling second best, of always doing the right thing but never being truly valued. A lifetime of playing the good daughter. The protagonist of this story had spent years of buried resentment convincing herself that she was part of the family, that her contributions mattered. She was the one who ran errands, fixed problems, supported her parents financially, and took care of things when no one else would. Meanwhile, her brother Daniel, the golden child, did nothing, yet was showered with love, respect, and opportunities. This dynamic is eerily similar to what we see in high-profile families. Donald Trump's siblings, for example, had starkly different roles within the family. Fred Trump Jr., his older brother, was expected to follow in their father's real estate empire, but he didn't fit the mold. Instead of support, he was cast aside, while Donald was propelled into the spotlight as the favored heir. The pressure and lack of acceptance led Fred Jr. to alcoholism and an early death. In many cases, families don't just favor one child over the other. They strategically position one to succeed, while another is seen as disposable. This was exactly what our protagonist faced. Her parents didn't just overlook her, they saw her as a means to an end. They relied on her when needed, but never truly valued her as they did her brother. Her wake-up call? Not being invited to Thanksgiving unless she left her children behind, while her brother's children were welcomed with open arms. The moment. Everything changed. The realization hit hard. Up until that moment, she had still believed, hoped, that maybe, just maybe, she was exaggerating the favoritism. But when her parents said, "Your kids aren't welcome, but Daniel's are," it was a slap in the face. For years, she had tolerated their subtle put-downs, their microaggressions, their dismissive attitude toward her children. But now, they weren't even trying to hide it. Her children, the people she loved most in the world, were not good enough for the family. She had a choice. 1. Stay silent, accept it, and go to dinner without her kids, allowing the cycle to continue. 2. Finally, walk away and make them regret it. She chose the second. This moment is not just about family, it's about realizing self-worth. This is the same decision that Oprah Winfrey had to make early in her career. Raised in poverty, disregarded by many, she was constantly told to play small. Had she listened, she would have never become the woman she is today. Instead, she walked away from limiting beliefs, knowing she was worth more. The fallout, cutting them off. The first step in reclaiming her power, cutting her parents off financially. She had been helping them for years, running errands, handling paperwork, and even giving them access to her credit card. At some point in the past, when her father was struggling financially, she had added her parents as authorized users on her credit card. The plan was temporary, but they never stopped using it, and they never told her. When she canceled the card, her mother called in a panic, not because she had lost a credit card, but because she had lost control over her daughter. "Your father's card was declined at the grocery store. Did you do something?" "You mean my credit card? The one you've been using for years without asking?" Her mother dismissed it like it was no big deal. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you. The least you could do is support us." This is the classic narcissistic parent mindset. Instead of gratitude, they felt entitled. They believed their child owed them for being born, but she wasn't playing their game anymore. Escalation, the parents strike back. No one gives up power easily, and when narcissistic, manipulative people lose control, they escalate. Her parents started using emotional manipulation. They spread the story in the family that she was being ungrateful. Her brother tried to guilt trip her, saying, "Just give them a little money each month to keep the peace." And then, the final straw, they sent her a letter demanding reimbursement for raising her. $80,000. They wanted her to literally pay them back for food, school supplies, and medical bills from when she was a child. This level of entitlement is extreme, but not uncommon. Many children of wealthy, controlling parents have experienced this. Elon Musk has openly talked about his father's manipulative nature. Despite growing up privileged, he had to fight his way out of a toxic family dynamic to become independent. Her reaction? She ripped the letter in front of them. "You'll regret this." "No, Mom, you will." The grand revenge. True revenge isn't about hurting people. It's about showing them you never needed them in the first place. Her parents thought she would crawl back. They thought she couldn't function without them. But she was finally free. They tried one last desperate move, threatening legal action to claim grandparents' rights over her children. But they had no case. They had no leverage. And when they realized that, they disappeared. The silence was deafening, and it was the greatest gift they ever gave her. The takeaway, the power of walking away. This isn't just a story about family betrayal, it's about recognizing self-worth and having the courage to walk away from toxic relationships, even if they're your own parents. Favoritism and manipulation exist everywhere, from high-profile families like the royals, to billionaires like Elon Musk, to everyday people. The lesson here? You do not owe loyalty to those who mistreat you. Walking away is sometimes the strongest move you can make. Revenge isn't about getting even. It's about showing that you were never beneath them to begin with. She didn't just walk away. She forced them to see what life looked like without her. And in the end, they were the ones left with nothing. Final thought. If you've ever felt undervalued, ignored, or cast aside, remember that you have the power to rewrite your story. Destiny is not something handed to you, it's something you take back. Act 3. The deepening divide. The cost of being an outsider. The power of walking away. There is a harsh but liberating truth about conditional relationships. Once you stop being useful, you see people's true colors. For years, the protagonist was expected to serve, support, and sacrifice without complaint. But the moment she decided to stand up for herself and her children, her family dismissed her as difficult and dramatic. This is not an isolated experience. We see this in high-powered families and political dynasties all the time. Prince Harry, for example, spent his life playing the role of the loyal secondary son, the spare. He was the one who filled in the gaps, who did what was asked of him. But the moment he made a decision that didn't serve the family's interests, he became an outsider overnight. The same thing happens to the protagonist. By choosing to defend her children, she is no longer useful to the power structure within the family, so she is discarded. But here's the twist. Instead of begging for acceptance, she does something they never expected. She walks away, and then she makes them regret it. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just absence. For toxic families and power-hungry individuals, the worst thing you can do isn't to fight them. It's to deprive them of access to you. The protagonist doesn't need to yell or demand fairness. Instead, she does something much more powerful. She cuts them off from everything they use to take for granted. She stops answering their calls. She cancels the credit cards they were secretly using. She withdraws all the quiet, unpaid labor they had always expected from her. And just like that, the people who thought she needed them realized that it was the other way around all along. This move echoes what some of the world's most powerful people have done when they realized they were being undervalued. Steve Jobs was pushed out of Apple, only to return years later as the one who would save the company. Oprah walked away from toxic professional relationships that tried to limit her potential, only to build an empire that no one could control. Elon Musk left companies he co-founded, only to dominate the industry on his own terms. The protagonist may not be running a billion-dollar empire, but the principle is the same. Her family assumed that she would always be there, always be loyal, always be available. But loyalty without respect is servitude, and she wasn't playing that role anymore. The breaking point, they try to win her back. No one lets go of control easily, especially not people who believe they are entitled to you. Her family, in their panic, tries everything to win her back. They guilt-trip her. "We're family, you can't just walk away." They lie and manipulate. "You're overreacting. We didn't mean it like that." They even try legal threats, suing for grandparents' rights over her kids. But they have no leverage anymore. They thought she would break without them. Instead, she is thriving without them. The moment they realize this, they disappear. Not because they have changed, but because they know they've lost. And that is the best revenge. The takeaway: true power comes from knowing when to leave. The protagonist's story is not just about family, it's about knowing your worth. The moment you realize that you are being treated as an option, a tool, a second-class participant, that is the moment you must ask yourself, Is this worth my dignity? Powerful people throughout history have walked away from toxic environments and come back stronger. Jeff Bezos left a stable finance job to build Amazon. Michelle Obama refused to shrink herself to fit others' expectations. Prince Harry walked away from the monarchy, and now he controls his own story. The lesson here is clear. You don't have to fight to be valued. You just have to leave. And when you do, the people who thought they controlled you will suffer the most brutal consequence of all, living with the realization that they needed you more than you ever needed them. Act 4. The unspoken decision, choosing dignity over approval. The power of choice, confrontation versus disengagement. When faced with exclusion, unfairness, and betrayal, there are always two options: confrontation or quiet disengagement. Both paths have been taken by some of the most influential figures in history, and each comes with its own consequences. 1. Confrontation, the path of direct challenge. Some people refuse to accept injustice quietly. They push back, challenge authority, and expose hypocrisy. History is filled with leaders who took this approach, ensuring they were never overlooked or dismissed. Take Theodore Roosevelt, for example. As president, he confronted party elites, corporate monopolies, and the entrenched power structures of his time. He didn't just accept things as they were, he fought back, demanding fairness, breaking trusts, and reshaping American politics. If the protagonist of this story were to take this route, she might do something similar. Call out the hypocrisy of her family directly. Refuse to attend Thanksgiving altogether and make it clear why. Expose the favoritism in front of extended relatives. Demand equal treatment for her children and refuse to let the issue slide. Confrontation forces a reckoning. It makes those in power uncomfortable because it disrupts their illusion of control. The problem? It often leads to conflict, and not everyone has the energy to engage in battles that may never change the minds of those who refuse to listen. 2. Disengagement. The power of walking away. On the other end of the spectrum, there are those who choose to walk away rather than fight, not because they are weak, but because they understand that some battles aren't worth fighting. Look at Oprah Winfrey. Early in her career, she faced numerous barriers: racial discrimination, sexism, and industry leaders who underestimated her. But instead of wasting energy fighting for approval in spaces that refused to see her worth, she created her own empire. She walked away from traditional TV structures and built an entirely new platform, one where she made the rules. For the protagonist, disengagement might look like creating new traditions with her children that don't rely on family approval, withdrawing emotional and financial support from those who took her for granted, refusing to waste energy convincing people to love and respect her family. Disengagement isn't about giving up, it's about shifting power dynamics. It sends a message: I don't need you, you need me. And that realization? That's the real punishment for those who thought they could control you. The family power dynamic, a battle of perception. In families where favoritism and manipulation run deep, control is often disguised as love. The protagonist's parents made it seem as though the exclusion of her children was a simple, practical decision. But in reality, it was a power move. This is a classic tactic used by powerful families, corporations, and even governments. The British royal family, for example, operates on a strict hierarchy where certain members are given more privileges than others, not always based on merit, but on how well they fit into the existing system. Corporate America, too, has structures where some people, often women and minorities, are subtly excluded from decision-making spaces under the guise of tradition or fit. The protagonist's parents are doing the same thing. They pretend their decision isn't personal, but in reality, it's deeply personal. They are making it clear: you are not as valued as your brother. Your children are not as important as his. The real battle isn't about Thanksgiving dinner, it's about whether she is willing to accept this dynamic or dismantle it. The fallout of walking away. When someone who has always been reliable, available, and eager to please finally walks away, it shatters the balance of power. the ones who once took them for granted panic. The protagonist's decision to cut off financial support and emotional labor isn't just about revenge, it's about restoring balance. When she stops answering calls, when she cancels the credit cards, when she no longer plays the role of the loyal daughter, her family is forced to confront a harsh truth. They needed her more than she needed them. This realization mirrors what happened when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped away from the royal family. Oh, the institution assumed they would never leave because of their duty, tradition, and financial dependency. Oh, but when they did, the monarchy was thrown into a crisis, losing a major source of global goodwill and influence. Elon Musk left PayPal to build his own empire. Oh, when he was ousted from the company he co-founded, many assumed he would fade away. Oh, instead, he went on to build Tesla, SpaceX, and revolutionize multiple industries. Walking away doesn't just free you, it forces those who underestimated you to face the consequences of their actions. So the final attempt. When manipulation fails, people who thrive on control don't give up easily. The protagonist's family, desperate to pull her back in, resorts to guilt trips. We're family, you can't just abandon us. Gaslighting. You're overreacting. This isn't that big of a deal. Legal threats. Attempting to claim grandparents' rights over her children. But here's the thing. When manipulation fails, the truth is revealed. They never loved unconditionally. They just loved the control they had over her. And now, they have nothing left to hold over her head. The takeaway: choosing your own path. At the heart of this story is a lesson about self-worth and power. Many people spend years trying to earn the approval of those who will never truly value them. But the most powerful decision anyone can make is to stop seeking validation from the wrong places. The protagonist had two options. 1. Fight for her place at the table. 2. Build her own table. She chose the second option, and that's what made her powerful. The greatest revenge is not anger. It's success. It's peace. It's proving that you never needed their approval to begin with. Because, in the end, the people who truly love you will never make you fight for a seat at their table. They will build the table with you. Act 5. The psychological toll. Understanding the lasting impact. The battle for dignity. When family becomes the opposition. Being excluded from a family event based on arbitrary standards isn't just an inconvenience. It's a wound that cuts deep into one's sense of belonging. It's not just about missing a dinner or being left out of a gathering. It's about being told, you don't belong here, you don't meet our standards. And when this rejection extends to one's children, the emotional scars become even deeper. This situation mirrors the experiences of many individuals who have faced professional or social rejection despite their efforts, achievements, and contributions. It's not about merit. It's about control, favoritism, and the selective nature of inclusion. The protagonist, in this case, isn't just fighting for fairness. They are fighting for their dignity. Rejection and the quest for validation, a universal struggle. One of the most painful aspects of being cast aside, whether by family, colleagues, or an institution, is the nagging thought, why wasn't I good enough? It's a question that has haunted some of the world's most powerful individuals. Take Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks. Born into a working-class family in Brooklyn, Schultz was frequently dismissed in his early career because he didn't come from the elite. Despite his vision for Starbucks, many corporate leaders scoffed at the idea of turning a small coffee chain into a global lifestyle brand. His eventual success didn't erase those early struggles, but it reshaped his understanding of validation. He realized he didn't need the approval of the corporate elite. He just needed to create something they couldn't ignore. Similarly, consider Mark Zuckerberg. When he first launched Facebook from his dorm room at Harvard, Silicon Valley's tech establishment dismissed him. He wasn't part of their inner circle, didn't have the traditional credentials of a powerful entrepreneur, and was often looked down upon. But instead of fighting for their approval, he built something so influential that they had no choice but to acknowledge him. Like Schultz and Zuckerberg, the protagonist in this story is faced with a choice. Fight for a place at a table where they are clearly not wanted, or build a new table entirely. The lesson here is crucial. Self-worth should never be dictated by those who fail to recognize it. The power play, how families use control. In many family dynamics, control is often disguised as love. Parents or elders may act as though they are making decisions for the good of the family, when in reality, they are maintaining a rigid hierarchy where only certain people get preferential treatment. This is exactly what is happening in this story. The protagonist's parents frame exclusion as a necessity rather than a choice, using phrases like, "It's just easier this way. We need a peaceful dinner. Don't take it personally." But the truth is, exclusion is always personal. This isn't about convenience. It's about enforcing power structures and ensuring certain people are kept in their place. This is a pattern we've seen throughout history, not just in families, but in corporations, politics, and elite social circles. The British royal family has long operated on a strict hierarchy, pushing out or sidelining those who don't conform to the institution. The treatment of Princess Diana and, more recently, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle is a testament to this. Those who don't fit the mold are quietly excluded under the guise of tradition. Corporate America has historically been structured to favor those who already hold power. Women and minorities are often excluded from informal networking events, dinners, golf outings, or private meetings where major deals are made. It's not outright discrimination, but the effect is the same. Only certain people are truly in. For the protagonist, the exclusion of their children is the final straw. It's a moment of clarity, the realization that this dynamic will never change unless they force it to. Choosing the path, confrontation versus disengagement. Once the protagonist understands the full extent of their family's favoritism, they are faced with a crucial decision. Do they confront the injustice head-on, or do they walk away and build something better? 1. The path of confrontation. Throughout history, many have chosen to fight back. Theodore Roosevelt was one such figure. He challenged corporate monopolies, party elites, and those who sought to maintain the status quo. When faced with exclusion, he didn't just accept it, he pushed back, forcing his way into spaces that tried to shut him out. If the protagonist were to take this approach, they might call out the favoritism directly in front of the entire family, expose the hypocrisy of their parents' decisions, refuse to attend Thanksgiving at all, and ensure everyone knows why, demand equal treatment for their children. Confrontation can be effective, but it comes at a cost. It often leads to conflict, resentment, and further alienation. And sometimes, the people being confronted simply double down on their behavior rather than change. 2. The path of disengagement. On the other hand, some of the most successful figures in history didn't waste time fighting for approval. They simply walked away and built something of their own. Oprah Winfrey didn't fight to be included in old media structures that dismissed her. She created her own empire, one where she controlled the narrative. Elon Musk was pushed out of PayPal, but instead of trying to fight his way back in, he built Tesla and SpaceX, proving that he never needed PayPal in the first place. For the protagonist, disengagement might look like creating new traditions for their children instead of fighting for inclusion, withdrawing all emotional and financial support from the family, choosing to prioritize their own happiness over family approval. Disengagement isn't about giving up. It's about taking back control. It's saying, I don't need your validation. I create my own worth. The fallout, when power is taken away. One of the most fascinating dynamics in human relationships is what happens when someone who was always the giver stops giving. Those who have taken them for granted often panic when their free source of labor, money, or support disappears. Try to manipulate them into coming back through guilt, gaslighting, or playing the victim. Attempt to punish them in some way, sometimes even legally. This is exactly what happens in this story. The protagonist's parents, having relied on their financial and emotional labor for years, suddenly find themselves without their most reliable family member. And their response? Guilt trips. We're family. You can't just abandon us. Gaslighting. You're overreacting. It wasn't that serious. Financial threats. You owe us for everything we've done for you. This is a desperate attempt to reassert control, but when manipulation fails, the truth is revealed. They never truly loved unconditionally. They just loved the power they had. Final thought, winning on your own terms. At the heart of this story is a lesson about power, dignity, and self-worth. The protagonist spent years trying to earn approval that was never freely given. But in the end, they realized something powerful. True belonging isn't about being accepted by the wrong people. It's about creating your own space where you are valued. Because the greatest revenge isn't anger. It's happiness, success, and the knowledge that you never needed their validation to begin with. Conclusion. The sweetest revenge isn't what you think this. It wasn't just about Thanksgiving dinner, or a single phone call, or even the thousands of dollars they had. This was about decades of being treated as an afterthought, of abuseful but never wanted. And in the end, the best revenge wasn't making them suffer. It was taking back my power. For years, I had been chasing approval from people who would never give it. I won, because family isn't about blood, it's about respect. And the day you realize that you don't need to fight for love that should be freely given, that's the day you truly set yourself free. So here's my question to you. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members? What was your bar? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear from you. And if you love stories like this, make sure you subscribe to Destiny Rewritten, because until next time, never settle, never beg for love, and most importantly, rewrite your own destiny.